Steve. My man, Engineer Steve, live in the stash. I almost scared Charles there. You saw that? He was like, what's happening? I just heard a boom. We're good, baby.
Explosion.
That just means we're live back in Stash Nation, hanging out with you for your 11 to 12 o'clock hour, ESPN Radio, 1700 Real Talk Radio, San Diego. Tracking down some cool local people, talking about some important local stuff. And the goal, of course, leaving you a little better than how we found you. I got Kyle Yaege in the house of HickmanRobinsonLaw.com, flanked by Charles Williams over at FriedmanBrandon.com, and we're talking us some Air BNB. What do we do? By the way, check the rebroadcast over at SecretStashRadio.com, this and every other show before it. And more specifically, we're actually streaming live right now. If you go over to Twitter, at our handle is Follow the Stash. You can ask these two guys, these two heavyweights, a question live about Airbnb that you might have. I mean, it's a new topic.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people are talking about it, so wouldn't be surprised if maybe a question pops up. We'll be able to ask it live. So we talked about this sexual assault case over in, I think it was in Spain, wasn't it, right? And that's
I believe so.
Definitely have ripple effects over here local. We talked about individual issues, and then the HOA issue, basically what's going to happen after some of the independent bodies get in touch with this information. Now, what about the larger scope? So let's get government stuff going here. What, do you want to start with us, Charles?
Well, I wasn't sure, Jesse. Did you want to cover the give the crowd a background on the old lady? I guess you could call her the old lady from North Pike.
Poor old lady. Yeah. So basically, gang, if you didn't check the news, I think it was on everybody's news feeds and radar and local hack stations. Is there was an owner up in it was like North Park or somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Like right around over here in the heart of San Diego, and she actually was trying to turn her house into an actual B&B. Went for a permit, they got denied, probably from zoning issues, we would imagine. And then so she's like, all right, cool. And then she went Airbnb with it. Neighbors got pissed, right? They actually got, I think, Todd Gloria, or they got, was it Todd Gloria?
I think it was Todd Gloria, yeah.
Local hotshot and in on the case, and he literally took it on personally. And then, boom, the whole thing sort of imploded, right? Now, city's getting involved. They're finding her. So that's the context, right? Now let's get behind the scenes on this. Like, what do you think? Does this have teeth? Where are we going with this?
I'll cover the zoning piece because that's kind of the linchpin of the government side of things. For those of the listeners that don't know, we're very tightly regulated in San Diego about how you can use your property. And depending on exactly how your property is zoned, in most cases, a single-family home is not going to be something that you can use for a commercial operation unless you get an exception of variance. And so, in many instances, being an Airbnb renter is technically a violation of your zoning restrictions. Now, different jurisdictions have taken different approaches about how to do that, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But in terms of where San Diego is right now, I mean, in many instances, you are technically violating the zoning, but the city doesn't find out about it. They have limited resources on enforcement, so a lot of people just aren't getting the fines.
Well, nothing happens until you piss someone off.
Yeah, exactly.
And the next thing you know, they build a case, they go find you online. Oh, they're renting it. Boom, it gets collateral momentum, and then there you go.
Exactly. Now, San Diego, this is going to be an extension of the political discussion coming up this next cycle, or at least it should be, in my opinion. Different jurisdictions have taken different attitudes. So San Francisco has created its own little caveat to zoning restrictions for private residences where you can lease it out for commercial purposes only a certain number of months out of the year if you register for this tax, the other tax, and you basically jump through all the hoops to make sure that everybody's getting their share of the pie.
Yeah.
And
which, if I might, is in a word, evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. You can't dissuade this thing from happening. It's already happened. So the question is, are you on its train or are you on its tracks?
Yeah.
And if a city's smart, they'll evolve. They'll get in front of it, and they'll make sure that they put their hand out appropriately to make sure that they're tied in with the outcome. And then the other side of this, of course, which I hope you'll hit on, is property values.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, coming back to the neighbor versus neighbor issue, I mean, one of the impacts of having a bunch of strangers coming in is it impacts what your neighborhood is and how desirable it is. But on
that's from a negative side.
Yeah, from
right?
a negative side. On the
side.
positive side, yeah. I mean, there are apartment owners downtown, down by the beach areas that have essentially doubled their income stream, at least during the summer when there's high demand, by putting all of the units on Airbnb.
Well, everybody knows that vacation rentals are a totally different ballgame from, more long-term lease rentals. I mean, this is not, now all of a sudden being created by Airbnb. But what it's doing is it's taking that otherwise fixed conversation element and applying it off of the beach. Like that was always like the beachfront ones, you know what I mean? But now it's applying it to the residential neighborhoods. And that is like oil and water for, Mr. and Mrs. Grandma Smith, who have had their neighborhood the same way the whole time.
Yep.
But they can't stop the wave though, right?
No, it's going to happen. And it's really interesting because some jurisdictions have taken a very hard line enforcement approach, and they've bulked up their city attorney offices with a full department to try to attack these issues and kind of slow the process down. But I'm really interested to see how things shake out with the jurisdictions that are doing what San Francisco's doing, which is we're going to let it happen, but we're going to try to put it inside of a framework where it doesn't disturb the neighborhood too much. Like there's only a certain number of months out of the year that you can do it, so that it's not constantly a vacation rental next door. It just happens to be during, peak vacation season that happens.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that.
And that flavor extends also. It's extended kind of on the international context. I mean, one of the most recent cases we now have, and I'm not sure if you've seen this, Kyle, was Australia. I mean, they're saying, well, hey, where's our piece of the pie? This is an American company. Or they also have what's called the value-added tax. And most interesting is people who are maybe from foreign, maybe from Canada. You own some property out here. That's your vacation home. Then you decide, hey, why don't I just put it on Airbnb? Whoa, wait a second. Now you got the IRS asking about what you're doing, what you filled out, what you've done. So the government compliance step is pretty huge, and it's growing, fortunately or unfortunately, because they definitely want their piece of the pie.
Well, and speaking of that, we've got we actually have a question that's live here from our Twitter feed, Follow the Stash. How do you anticipate the courts will handle guests who refuse to leave? Like in a hotel, the key card can be deactivated, but in a property situation, right? So like, what do you guys think about that?
That is a very good question, and I would say that currently you're probably going to find yourself stuck in an unlawful detainer that can take 6 weeks or so if it's a default, and even longer if they choose to fight and try. I mean, one of my very first cases was actually a holdover tenant, a professional holdover tenant, somebody who would sign the lease with a rubber check.
Oh, wow.
And then they would be in occupancy, and they knew how to file an answer and fight the case, and they knew how to stretch the system out for 2 months to 3 months before it came to trial and they were going to be evicted. And they just did that to landlord after landlord after landlord after landlord. And you could actually look at between the criminal history and the civil court history, they were either incarcerated or they were in the process of screwing over a private landlord for a decade or more.
Shame on the leaseor for not doing a background check.
Well, exactly.
But in an Airbnb or a short-term type of scenario, you're not doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a great tool for somebody to abuse. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a great point. It's a fantastic question, by the way. Any more questions you guys got, make sure you drop them over there. Follow the Stash on our Twitter feed. And you can also see this whole show streaming live right now, too. Is that, when you think about, it's a great point about the hotel thing, like that, they've already got it built into the system. It's like, that didn't work anymore. Peace out.
Yeah.
But like, how do you kick someone out that's literally hauled up in your bedroom? Like you mentioned earlier, let's say you're the vacationer.
Yeah.
You go out, you thought your trip was paid for. You come back home with your family and your kids, and you're not allowed back in your own house.
Yeah.
Well, you could try to argue that it's the equivalent of a hotel, and you may win. The problem is that when you do that, if you try to treat it like a hotel, you could be signing a very big check in terms of liability for wrongful eviction if you take those steps that a hotel would otherwise do, and a judge disagrees with you. And because there isn't a whole lot of case law out there, you're gambling in a big way.
Oh my God, that's saying the least. I mean, you're trying to set the precedent. That's going to cost you a fortune, even if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Well,
in the meantime, you're beset to these same old eviction rules.
And what you're going to do if you call yourself a hotel, you're just going to subject yourself to self-employment tax, and then you're looking at a whole bigger issue on the IRS side too.
Yeah, so you come running down the middle of the street with your torch, and then the government's like, "Oh, that's the case you want to make, huh? Well, step right in. We'll gladly service that claim." Yeah, good. So, gang, we talked about the sexual assault Airbnb style. We talked about individual issues Airbnb style. neighbors versus each other, leaseors versus leasee, HOA issues, maximum occupancy, minimum lease term, nuisance stuff, government stuff. Something tells me that there's one more thread that we haven't quite vetted through, and it might just be the most important glue that holds this whole conversation together, locally anyway. So stick around. We'll be right back to reveal what that is. Stash Nation gang, Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back.